Local voices, local conversations. You're listening to NAPAbroadcasting.com.
Thanks for joining us here at Napa Broadcasting. I know I've addressed this before, but think about this. The city of Detroit, in the heyday of the American auto business, was committed to being a booster for its autos because it kept the economy of that city afloat. The same is true in Milwaukee in the beer business, and even for the city of Anaheim, which works hard to supplement the appeal of Disneyland and keep people in that city. All over America, competition among cities and attractions for tourist dollars and for business dollars is a vital life force in the economy of American communities. The Napa Valley is no exception, perhaps because we all commute through world-class vistas or have the ability to dine in world-class restaurants on a Tuesday night or take the bounty of the harvest for granted. We forget the importance and the value of what we have here. We forget that, like everyone and every place else, efforts have to be made to tell our story, to tell others what we have to offer. It's what makes our valley of only 150,000 people one of the most prosperous counties in the state and in the country. The job of doing all of this falls on Visit Napa Valley and on its leaders like Gregory and Heywood, who join me today on Napa Broadcasting to talk about not just the work of Visit Napa Valley, but also to talk about our November ballot measures that will add to the TOT in order to encourage and build workforce housing here in the Napa Valley. Gregory, Heywood, thanks so much for coming in.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us back.
Well, it is a delight to have you both here. Thanks for coming in. First of all, for those that don't know, and it seems like something everybody should know. We were just talking a little bit about this before we went on the air. Explain a little bit, give the sort of thumbnail description of what Visit Napa Valley does.
Visit Napa Valley is the tourism promotion organization for the entire Napa Valley. So we try to be very strategic about how we manage things. We don't just tell people to come all year long. We work very hard to make sure that we can manage the number of people that come and at what time period. So we don't do any funding, any marketing whatsoever from about April through into October. We do none. And so all of our efforts are later on in the winter when we have space for people. We also do a lot now of what's called group sales, which is what happens when companies bring their people in and stay in the hotels, and that happens all for weekdays, which means that they're not putting on more weight onto the weekends, which is most of our data comes from. So it's a managed population that we're trying to bring into the valley and make sure they have the best time they absolutely can.
In that sense, it's much about managing tourism as it is about just bringing tourists in. There's really a management component to it.
Right, and the idea is not to bring in the more people, the better. It's about getting the right kind of people who are going to really love the Napa Valley. And you can see that in the data that we get. So we're actually, people are spending more money when they come. But so they're actually, the last time we had these numbers come in, we were about 17% up in terms of total revenue for lodging, and then we were only up by 6% people. So we think that's a really nice mix where we're getting far more revenue coming in than the number of people who are coming in.
And Catherine, talk about the fact that this is not limited to just tourists from the Bay Area or whatever, that this is a global enterprise, really.
Certainly. In fact, as Clay referred to this data, we do these biennial reports, and right now we have about 2/3 of our visitors come as day trippers. And what's important, again, it goes back to our strategy, is to convert those day trippers to overnight stays. We know they spend more than twice as much money per day while they're here, and often they don't need to be in their car the entire time. If you are here from the Bay Area in your car, that's where you spend a good share of your trip. Now, if you were to stay in downtown Napa, for instance, you could spend most of your trip walking or enjoying the Vine Trail. There's all sorts of alternative forms of transportation that not only keep visitors here and happy and spending, but reduce our local traffic.
Now that we've talked a little bit about what Visit Napa Valley does, the other misunderstanding, and this has come up even in the course of
There's
our
only
election
one more?
season. Well, there's probably a few more, but let's hit the big ones first. The other one is where the funding for this effort comes from and what the economics are of how Visit Napa Valley works.
Right. The vast majority of our funding comes from lodging. So lodging put in place what's called a tourism improvement district. And when we came around to understand how important the funding is, we learned that almost 50 destinations already had a thing called a tourism improvement district. So we worked with lodging for about a year, and lodging understood how important it was themselves. So we got lodging to approve this, and what it made us the 50th one in California. And so it's just been, without that, we wouldn't have any real meaning funding whatsoever. And I mean, we really would have been out of business if it weren't for the Tourism Improvement District. And lodging has been fantastic. They renewed it already. They renewed it for 10 years instead of the original 5 years. So lodging is very happy with it. And you'll hear more about how lodging is being very helpful, not only on that front, but on other fronts when Catherine talks about the TOT thing that we're working on together with lodging.
I mean, this is really the lodging community taxing itself, essentially.
That's exactly what it
Assessing
is.
itself.
Assessing itself.
Yeah.
The money that is allocated for this is money that is dedicated very specifically to the work that you do, to the things you're talking about. It's not like it could be used to pave the roads or anything else.
No, it has very limited amount of things as to how you can spend it. And by and far, it's mostly about marketing and sales. Those are the two things. We have some other things we can use it for, and we also have a couple of other things that help us. The Welcome Center we get some funds from, and our partnerships we get some funds from, and there are a couple other smaller ones, but in the main, it all comes from lodging for us.
And in fact, talk a little bit about how the lodging community has benefited from this and how it's obviously something that they think is good for them.
Well, they certainly do. We've been up every single year in terms of total lodging revenue until this last year, and that was because of the fires. So, we tried our very hardest to get that above last year, but we were off by, I think, 2.5%. So it could have been a lot worse. But the other things that are happening is that we're getting far more people from outside the United States now. When we started, we had about 9% of our guests coming from outside the United States. Now it's over 20%.
Wow.
And the highest people who come in the most now are from China. It was always Canada because of their proximity to us, but now it's China. And it'll be very interesting to see when we get the new study, which will come out like in March of next year, and see if it's still China, and I bet it is. The challenge we have with China is to get people to stay overnight. Many of them come up from San Francisco and then go back to San Francisco the same night, and we like people to stay overnight.
Right.
It's very similar to like a Got Milk campaign or the pork industry, that kind of thing, the other white meat type of campaign. It's more of a trade-based effort. And the TID allowed the assessment to be levied on all lodging. So a larger hotel like the Meritage, for example, has a sales and marketing team, but some of our smaller properties, small B&B like the Beasley House, with limited staff and limited marketing resources, they're all about the hospitality. We help get the visitors here, and then they're given this world-class hospitality.
Right. The other aspect of this is really an appreciation for what all of these tourism dollars do for the community, how valuable it is for the community.
Right. It's a tremendous amount. If you look at the total amount of funding or total amount of what comes from tourism, it's about $80 million a year. At least it was in the last study. So, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of money, and it also has a tremendous amount of impact on jobs. You want to talk about how many jobs there are in the Napa Valley that are from tourism?
Tourism and tourism-related businesses, there are over 13,000 jobs. I think back to Clay's point, when we talk about the $80 million, some of that's property tax. Property value is obviously very valuable here in Napa Valley, but $47 million of that is in TOT. No other segment of our community pays the TOT other than a visitor staying here. So when people say we should get the tourists to be paying for more, really a good share of the general fund comes from that TOT. So in the case of Napa, we went from $9 million in 2011, and now we're over $18 million in TOT's contribution to the city's general fund.
And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, it's certainly not there yet, but a couple of more large hotels that it could be where the TOT dollars to the city of Napa exceeds the sales tax dollars.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yep.
In the case of Yountville, it's over 65% of their
Right.
general fund.
Yep.
And the general fund, I've learned a lot since I started working here about government, not necessarily how it functions, but about the budgets. And TOT is supporting things like public safety and roads, and in the county, the jail, the courthouse, the infrastructure, government. Somebody has to pay for the government.
The city of Calistoga now gets just under 60% of its funding from TOT.
And that's without two big hotels
It's gonna be
that are
even
going to
much
open
higher.
within the year.
Yeah. Well, one of them in the next year.
Okay.
It's all part of a larger ecosystem, Jeff. When you think about what the government has to do to sustain itself and its revenue, Visit Napa Valley is an integral part of that because the TID is in essence investment funding. If Visit Napa Valley is successful, if our hotel industry is successful, that generates more TOT, and then it's up to our elected officials to make sure that that's spent for the benefit of the community for all of us.
Exactly.
And of course, it also generates more sales tax revenue. I mean,
It
people
does.
come here, they spend money, whether it's shopping in stores or going into restaurants or whatever it may be.
Yep. The average spend in the last study that we did was about $820 or so per couple for every day. Every day. That's a pretty good and handsome amount of money coming into the valley.
Mm-hmm. Another misconception, I said we'd get to some others. Another one is that it's the tourists that are creating all the traffic here in the Napa Valley that everyone talks about and that everyone complains about, when in fact a good portion of the traffic problem is a local problem, not a tourist problem.
Well, that's true. I mean, the tourists don't get up and start driving at 5 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock or stay.
Doesn't everybody do that on vacation? Let's get up at 4 in the morning.
But people like to blame everything on tourists, and it's just not the case. I mean, it's a beautiful valley for everybody, but the people who are coming from different places are relaxing. They're here to relax, so they don't get going as early as those of us who work here. And so the real problem for traffic is really the locals, including me.
To listen to, right, including all of us, to listen to the misconceptions, it's like all the tourists want to get up at 7 every morning and go to American Canyon High School. That's really where all the tourists want to go.
That would appear that way.
Yeah.
Well, if all of this isn't enough, the lodging industry is now undertaking an initiative which will be on the ballot in all of our cities and,
Yep.
and in the unincorporated part of the county come this November, just 5 weeks from tomorrow, to increase the TOT another 1%, dedicated dollars for affordable housing.
Yep.
Talk about that, Clay.
Well, I'm going to let Catherine do that
Catherine?
because that's
Sure,
her
sure.
that's her baby. And she's been working very, very hard on this. So
Well, I think really this is it's a monumental effort, one I never really understood until I rolled up my sleeves. But the Affordable Housing Task Force that convened, almost 4 years ago now, and had presented a report with all the different ways the community could come together to improve the housing situation for everyone. And increasing TOT was in that report. And I believe that the industry was just not ready. We were just not ready to embrace that. But where it's really hitting home now is in a labor shortage. When you get an unemployment rate that's down below 3%, that just means that we've hired everyone that we can hire. And until people can start moving here, living here full time, their quality of life is impacted when they are stuck in a commute with the rest of the workers coming to Napa Valley. And so it's not unusual for someone to seek a job closer to home, closer to family, closer to their kids' school. So we started having some very substantial discussions with the lodging industry, and we're talking lodging leaders. We convene lodging GMs and owners every other month for a lunch. We get guest speakers come in. We do topical information sessions, a lot of networking. And I think this is where it hit home, was if a large property has 20 unfilled positions, service suffers, and that's what Visit Napa Valley is known for. We are one of the most world-renowned, hospitality-driven places, and we can't have service suffer ever. It's part of our brand. And,
and there are even restaurants that have closed because they haven't been able to get enough people to work there that are at the level that they need. So, I mean, it's beyond lodging, but that's the biggest take on it, yeah.
So our HR contacts in the larger hotels are also very interested in helping to see this through. We are seeing all the electeds participate in the process. Once we were able to get to the conversation to a point where the ballot measures were a reality, the electeds have just been really working hard at supporting it, making contacts for us, helping us fundraise. We'd like to see more promotion of it. It's really, really grassroots. We've met with any housing advocate that will listen. And in fact, the real estate community, the developer community, they're all being very, very helpful and supportive.
What is, Clay, what have you heard with respect to arguments against it? Because in many ways, this is an overused phrase, a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is seems like a classic case of that.
Well, there have been nobody who's come out in public that is against it. So it's phenomenal. And I don't think we actually ever got to the amount of money it will bring to the community is about $5 million a year, and that's that would help tremendously.
And explain how this is dedicated to affordable housing, workforce housing, and how that will work.
So this particular initiative is a special tax. So it will not go and join the other funding with TOT in the general fund. It will be earmarked, which I know electeds hate earmarking anything, but we are asking the voters to earmark these funds. We need a 2/3 supermajority for this to pass. It has to pass in each jurisdiction. So FISHED, if anybody wants to remember the word fished, those are all of our measure letters. I is for the county. So put yourself in your city limits. So here in Napa, you will vote for the city measure, and that's to tax those hotels and lodging properties in the city. But you are also asked then to tax or levy those lodging properties in the unincorporated county outside the city limits. So all Napa County voters get to vote for Measure I. It's when you're in a specific jurisdiction, you vote for that city's. So for Napa, it's Measure F. So Napa residents will be voting F and I. Now, those two combined make up almost $3 million. The city of Napa, with the number of properties, lodging rooms, and the TOT that it generates, we estimate it'll be about $2 million. The unincorporated county, the second highest at about $1 million, and then it falls from there.
And just to clarify what you said, even though we'd love it, we hope and really are working hard to make sure that all the jurisdictions get theirs in place. But if they don't, the other ones can still be in place.
That was
without
my next question.
Yeah.
If one community doesn't pass it
Right.
for any reason, or there's confusion or misunderstanding,
Right.
the others still would take effect.
Correct. Yeah.
As would the county one.
Correct. And those monies can be leveraged with other funds. There's the housing bond is on the state's ballot. And what I'm told is that there will be local matches necessary to really access the more substantial funds. And so this is a step in that direction of filling those coffers to say we've got local matching funds. Also, there's an opportunity for collaboration between jurisdictions. So in the case of St. Helena, there was a project where the county contributed money to make sure that project came to fruition. And just like we see, working together on Napa Pipe, working together on Old Sonoma Road. I mean, there's something that's still in play, right? Discussions are there. Perhaps this money helps to make more affordable housing and workforce housing at that particular site. I shy away from talking about specific projects because then people say, well, how do I sign up for that project?
Or I don't like that project.
Right, because that's in my backyard. So.
What we really feel good about is that each of these measures has the flexibility to do with those funds what makes the best sense for that community. We hear that Yountville is built out. Well, Yountville does have affordable housing that's deed restricted. Those deeds do come due at some point, and maybe the city or the town of Yountville wants to figure out a way to further preserve those, or perhaps they want to participate in a project that's outside their region on the south end of Yountville, north end of Napa, that makes a proximity housing sense.
It's important that people understand that while this 1% would be dedicated towards affordable housing in the way you've explained, it doesn't change anything with respect to the other TID monies, the 2% TID monies that are specifically earmarked, as we explained earlier, for Visit Napa Valley and for the tourism management that we talked about earlier, and that money cannot be used at all. No matter how noble the goal, that money is very restricted.
Yeah. That would have state legislation would have to change that those circumstances, and actually that was something that we investigated. It was there a model similar to the tourism improvement district that would be a housing improvement district, and again we would have to go to the state. What we're compelled to do under our management district plan is prove special benefit. The marketing dollars that we get are required to be used for marketing the Napa Valley, not to build housing, not to build roads. The local jurisdictions where a little bit of the TID money stays, 25% of that money, they can do small infrastructure improvements if they show that there's benefit to lodging and benefit to tourism, because again, they're tourism marketing dollars.
Right.
So
things like fixing a sidewalk or something, or putting up park benches,
or the fact that the Vine Trail goes right in front of four actually hotels on Solano Avenue. It's perfectly accessed by our visitors. It's a wonderful guest amenity. So those types of projects, I know the gazebo in Calistogos where they have concerts in the park, the TID contributed to improving that, and the community benefited. That's the other thing, is some of these projects, really, really great projects, tourism dollars are being used and the community is benefiting. Right. So it's win-win.
And one other thing I don't think we said clearly enough, if we said it at all, is that most of the time when jurisdictions want to raise the TOT, most of the time lodging is not in favor of that because it makes them raise their rates, and they don't want to raise their rates. And so in this case, lodging in this valley are 90% in favor of this, and it's because they care about having the right number of people to work for them and to make it easier on their employees. And I think that's super important because this doesn't happen every day by any means.
And that it is, I think you can take that one step further in that it is a competitive business. The rates get to a certain point or they get too high. And, well, I'll go to Paso Robles instead because it's only, X $100 a night versus what it is in Napa.
Right. Yep. But lodging is pushing their own way, and they're doing a great job helping us out.
This is a kind of a virtuous circle in a way, because part of the reason it seems to me that lodging is willing to do this is because the other parts of tourism, the parts that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, have been so successful in managing tourism and bringing a steady flow of tourists to the community.
I think that's true. I mean, we've gotten so much support from lodging, and I think the way that it works is just like the rest of the Napa Valley. You know, I always talk about Robert Mondavi and, you know, the boat, the rising tide lifts all boats. Right, exactly. Thank you. And this is, I mean, this is another thing in that aura. It's people want this to work as best as possible, and that's what we're working on. And lodging is certainly stepped to the top.
Catherine, I want you to give one more time the initiatives in each community, what they are, what the letter is, so that people know.
Okay, sure. So for the city of Napa, that is Measure F. So citizens in the city limits will vote for F and I. For the town of Yountville, it's Measure S. So Yountville residents will vote for S and I. American Canyon is H, and they're really proud of that because H for housing. So American Canyon residents will vote for H and I. In St. Helena, it's Measure E, housing for everyone, and Measure I. And in Calistoga, it's Measure D. And so D and I.
I have to ask you, this is just for my own inside baseball, was there any way to get it uniform throughout the communities?
We talked with John Tudor's office about that, and no, the answer was no. We had to go with the naming conventions that were prescribed, and I'm still not clear as to what that was, but we even confirmed that all county residents were voting to levy the unincorporated county lodging, of which there are quite a few luxury properties out there.
Right.
And the answer was yes. So we did pursue the conversations to make sure that we weren't leaving a simpler solution on the table.
It has to be because they're separate jurisdictions. They have to, be themselves and act like their own city, I think.
Yeah,
so
it has to
but
be.
Yeah,
John said it had to be that way. I think that was really the bottom.
I'm not going there.
That's all right. I can.
What's also interesting, Jeff, and I know you follow the politics of everything, is this whole mail-in ballot phenomenon now. People will have their ballots a month before, and so the timing of the promotion.
They will have their ballots a week from tomorrow. They go out on the 8th.
Yeah. So
they get mailed out a week from today.
Right. Knowing how to time all of your promotions of things and the conversations that you have, just to make sure that people are hearing about it, but they're not completely sick of it either.
Glad you raised that point. Is there some place on your website that people can go if they want some more information about
Not on our website.
Or a website.
There is a website. It's workforcehousingfornapavalley.com.
Okay.
Yeah. And we also have a Facebook page. We're trying every form that we can afford. So the mix of digital, and then we'll have some mailers come out. The signage is out there.
Right.
But letters to the editor, we've got Housing Coalition folks and even some elected saying we'll get a letter out.
But again, I think it's important to emphasize that this is truly the classic win-win. That there is no downside to this.
None. There's not.
That there's a knee-jerk reaction that I understand people have, and I get it on a certain level that they hear tax of any kind and they think it's something they're opposed to. This is not a tax on them.
Correct.
It is something that the industry, which is essentially paying for this, has given their blessing to.
Absolutely.
And that it really is only a win-win for the community.
It absolutely is, yep.
I think, too, it's important to stress that workforce housing part of it. We're not talking about just the lodging industry or just the restaurant industry being served here. We're talking about the guy who puts new tires on your car, the person who cuts your hair, the person who bags your groceries. All of these people have a hard time finding an affordable living here, living situation. So rents, if we can do anything to make it more viable, that's really what a community does, right? We We take care of the people who take care of us. And so this is an opportunity for not only lodging to shine, but to really make a contribution. So,
Catherine Heywood, Clay Gregory, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
We
you,
appreciate
Jeff.
it.
You're listening to NAPAbroadcasting.com. Napa Valley Radio for the way we live now.